Well, hello. I'm so excited to present this first Facebook Live event for the Guardian's Rural Network. We're so honoured to have Fiona Simson of the National Farmers Federation and Fiona Davis of the Farmers for Climate Action to discuss the important issues that are playing out right in front of our very eyes. I just want to start by doing an acknowledgement of country. I'm on Wiradjuri land and I'd just like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I've learnt a lot from the local Wiradjuri people here and I just like to acknowledge them for that. Now, we've had such a big couple of weeks in terms of climate leading up to the COP talks. And so I really thought that this was a great opportunity to really pull apart some of the issues facing agriculture and rural communities in terms of climate change. So I might just start by just getting a sense of what the current landscape is for farmers and how they're responding to climate change. Because I think maybe we need to anchor ourselves in the present first before we look into the future and look at some of the government and business responses. So Fiona Simson, do you want to start with that question? How are farmers currently responding to climate change and how is it changing their business practice?
Yeah, thanks, Gabby, and great to be here today and coming to you live from beautiful Gomeroi land, where I'm really privileged to have known some of the previous elders, and I certainly pay my respects to current elders and future elders as well. We have a great relationship of mutual respect here on the Liverpool Plains and really focused on how we take that into the future. So really pleased to be here today. Farmers, I think, are at the moment right in this conversation. And I have to say something after the last couple of weeks, month or two, where obviously the conversation has really stepped up, then I think in actual fact, I've got way more questions now than I ever had answers. And a lot of farmers do as well. Look, I think what we're seeing now in Australia is that farmers are, and they've been known for it globally, and they continue to be incredibly innovative around the way that they manage their farms, their soils, their environment. And some of that is because of the environment that we actually farm in here in Australia. We are predominantly outdoor farmers when we're talking about our rangelands or our grazing animals. And we are exposed to an increasingly erratic and wild climate. Many farmers have just come out of what is the worst drought in living memory. We've experienced a whole season of bushfires and everything as well. Even this season now, up here in Armidale, there's been wild hailstorms and tornadoes. And farmers are really looking at how they can best prepare their farms to withstand those sorts of climatic shocks, and doing it in a way where they are really interested in preserving their soils, preserving their water resources, preserving their ground covers, all the things that actually bring more carbon into their cycles. So farmers, I guess, we've shown from 2005 to 15, our livestock sector's already reduced emissions by 57%. And we want to do more of what we're currently doing, but we'd like to do it in a way, we need to supercharge that if we're looking at the climate targets ahead. And we need some support with some of the tools that we're currently using to answer some of those questions that I spoke about earlier when we're talking about things like soil carbon and lowering emissions. It's all quite technical and there's a lot more questions than answers. So I guess in a nutshell, yes, we're doing stuff. We manage well over half of Australia's landscape. Can we do better? Always. But we're at this pointy end now where we've been very much a part of the conversation, which is where we wanted to be. And we now really want to do more of what we've been doing and do it better in a more data-driven, scientific way.
Fiona Davis, what are you finding? Your members specifically join your organisation because they're obviously concerned about climate change. So are you seeing, do you want to add to that? Are you seeing are you hearing something different, or is it pretty much the same?
So I would agree with what Fiona Simson has said there. We are, like, Australian farmers are brilliant at adapting, and they've been doing that for a long time, but it's getting harder and harder. And the other side of this is that farmers want to be part of the solution to climate change. But they also need to know that the rest of the economy is moving alongside them. So we've seen brilliant leadership from people across agriculture. We've been out in front of the federal government with our targets. And we now need to see the federal government. We've seen moves, in a good direction, but we need to see much more action, and particularly deep emission cuts this decade, because farmers can be part of the solution. We can draw down carbon, but it becomes harder and harder the longer we leave action on climate change. It just becomes a much bigger job. So we need to see real commitment from the federal government to make those strong, deep emission cuts this decade to really set us up for success in the future.
And so that was part of the criticism in the public debate, I think, of the government finally landing on that net zero 2050 target. You're saying, I guess, like Glasgow is saying generally, we want to see what the targets are for 2030. So I'm assuming you would say that the 2050 was not enough. But what about the rest of the government's climate plan? Do you want to give us an assessment of whether that fits together with what you're seeing on the ground that farmers are doing?
So in terms of, I just want to say, we do recognise it is a step forward to have this net zero by 2050 goal. I know it's not enough, but it is a step forward, and we have to recognise that. The plan, we welcome the recognition of the important role that agriculture can play in transitioning to a low emissions economy. But in that plan, we don't have enough detail. We need to see a plan from government that seriously encourages renewable industries, boosts regional jobs, and protects farmers and farming families. And we're not seeing that right now. And we also need to see a plan that commits to these deep emission cuts this decade.
So, Fiona Simson, what about your assessment of the government's plan that it took to Glasgow? Was that enough? Was it dovetailing with what you see on the ground? And also specifically to methane, I was slightly confused, I have to admit, given that Meat and Livestock Australia was one of the first groups to come out and say, livestock growers will be carbon neutral by 2030. Why is there this reticence of Australia, and particularly amongst the National Party that is largely associated with farmers? Why is there this reticence to commit to Joe Biden, the US president's methane plan?
Yeah, look, I think that, and a few questions in there, Gabby, rolled into one. So I think in terms of the government's 2050 pledge, and at this point, a lot of the leaders that went to Glasgow, they are just pledges. And I heard some commentary this morning around the fact that even the most ambitious pledges, people like Joe Biden, for example, they've still got to go home and get that to work. They've still actually got to go home and put a lot of that into place in regulation and legislation. And, I think that's one of the reasons why we've been really supportive of the step forward in terms of the 2050 target. Yes, at this point, there's not a lot of detail around it, but the broad principles that the government's talking about, we can agree with. So some of the sectors that really need to do a lot of the heavy lifting are sectors like electricity and transport. Yes, agriculture's been acknowledged in some way about some of what we've already done and some of the opportunities and the potential for going forward. There's lots of questions about that, but we haven't seen a lot of the detail around the 2050 target yet, exactly how we are going to get there. But I'm not necessarily that perturbed about that, because to me, we do need to see it and we do need to keep going forward, and it will give industry certainty. So for agriculture, we've already put in place a number of targets in terms of our individual commodities. Pork, for example, has a 2025 target. Red meat has a 2030 target. So, a lot of the business community, other parts of our sectors have already got targets, but we need to see them actually start to I think, act towards those commitments and to start to make some of the changes and transition so that we can actually be going to that next place. So whilst I think we can always do better, there's a whole lot of detail now that has to be filled in once we've made that 2050 target, which is now we've made that, then we need to keep moving forward, and industry needs to come to the table as well, as it's doing in Glasgow, as it's done here in Australia, and we need to keep actually, working towards some of the changes that will be identified and the transitions that will be identified and the pathway that we're going to be on over the next 30 years as we tread towards that target. So that's one thing. I think Kyoto did agriculture a really big disservice in so many ways. And one of the things that it did was that it really, I think, made people start to question about how we actually actively manage our land. And a lot of the rules and the international counting mechanisms and things that were put in place a long time ago now, arguably weren't really put in place with agriculture in mind, and may not necessarily work very well for agriculture, because when we're talking about soil carbon, for example, we don't even, we can't even really guess the potential. And there's scientists having all sorts of discussions in Australia at the moment about what is possible, what is not, how do we understand that carbon? How does it get in there? How does it go? It sounds simple enough, but I think, we've dumbed that down to just be about trees. And you'd know as well as I do, Gabby, that's not necessarily the answer. And it could be ignoring a whole enormous piece of the puzzle in terms of how farmers manage their grasslands and their rangelands and other parts of their farms as well, so that you end up with this net equation. So for me, I think some of that negativity that came from Kyoto is reflected now in positions that people are taking. I think it's become a very political issue, sadly, and a polarizing issue, sadly, because I actually think that without the politics, that now most of the community, most of the farming community are all on the same page, and really the politicians just need to get with it and start looking at the future. And so for agriculture, on farms like mine, where we've had to change enterprises over the years, where we've responded to the changes in climate, where we've responded to the changes in technology, without any crystal balls, without any of this science, without any ability to plan, we've now got some of those tools and are developing more. So it's an exciting space for us to be farming in the changing climate with some of these tools.
Rookie error, muted. Can I just clarify, though, whether the NFF supports the government's stance not signing up to the methane pledge?
We do, because the methane pledge, and without seeing a lot of the detail under the methane pledge could be a really blunt instrument and sounded like a very blunt instrument. And when you unpack what other countries are doing, and it's an interesting thing that at the moment we have both people at both extremes of the political spectrum, on the far left and the far right, who are both talking about the need to shoot animals and trying to actually skew that complete, the argument off a completely different way and not rooted in fact, but without understanding some of the regulations or legislation that government would put in under that methane pledge and where they're coming at it. I understand the methane pledge is more about fugitive emissions and was targeted more at fugitive emissions and gas extraction, etc. But the high level pledge just says you're going to cut methane by 30% by 2030. So there is that, there's room for an animal activist point of view to come in, and which creates all sorts of strange outcomes about, targeting agriculture. So we're feeling like we're a bit in the bunny in the headlights with that one. And without understanding, we very much felt like we were that in Kyoto. We're feeling much better about where we are positioned now, but we don't want to put ourselves through that again without understanding what's actually underpinning this position, how other countries are going to achieve it. Some of the countries have completely discounted agriculture, some have not, some are not even at the table. So, without understanding more detail about that, we certainly weren't supportive of the government just signing a blanket methane pledge.
So, Fiona Davis, what about Farmers for Climate Action? Do you support the government stance against the global methane pledge?
So this is where we would absolutely differ. We support signing the methane pledge, the reduction pledge. We think that this is not about agriculture. This is not about cows. This is about the government defending gas. So we need to make sure that, I think we said last week, don't throw the cow under the bus for the sake of the gas industry. Like, the red meat industry has been working very hard to reduce its methane emissions. It's going to continue to do that. We want to see more support from the government to really lift that work with greater investment in research, development and extension. So we're on that path. This is not about agriculture. This is about the gas industry. And we fully support at Farmers for Climate Action signing that pledge and really committing to that. And it's part of government to show the leadership, to show how we responsibly reflect this at home so that we don't unfairly impact on the ag industry. And I just also say around Kyoto, I think there's been a lot wrapped up with Kyoto that's not reflective of exactly what happened. There were a lot of changes to land management at a state level around that time, and it has left farmers feeling like they were poorly treated through that period. I think there's a lot going on there. What I really want to see is the focus on the future. So what I want to see is farmers really able to take advantage of the opportunities that the shift to a low emissions future holds, and to be able to diversify their incomes from income streams for storing carbon in soils and plants, for increasing biodiversity, and within productive farming systems. So I think there's such a positive vision there that we can really focus on, and that's where I'd love our attention to be.
Okay, so one of the things that we've seen in previous reports, and I think watching the political debate over this stuff over the last couple of decades I've found really intriguing, and that is the idea that farmers have been in the past, very careful not to cross into criticising other industries. But the National Outlook report, for example, by David Thodey and Ken Henry, found that unless transport and energy are doing their bit, farming really gets hit, cops it in terms of emissions reduction. And that maybe also plays into some of the agreements that happened around Kyoto, even though the state veg laws often came in, most of them came in before the Kyoto proposal. So there's a question from the group, possibly to Fiona Simson: how can farmers flourish in an uncertain environment, which includes having all of these new mining developments in farming areas? I mean, you cut your teeth politically, Fiona Simson, around the Liverpool Plains mining proposal by Shenhua. So how do we balance this? And given agriculture is a bit of a different industry in terms of its carbon cycles compared to a fossil fuel industry that's pulling stuff out of the ground and creating emissions.
So I think one of them's a political discussion, Gabby, and one of them's like an industry discussion. So as the head of NFF and a farmer myself, I'm really focused on agriculture. So I've focused, my job this time has been to make sure that agriculture has been at the table, has access to the tools, has been in all the conversations, in every conversation about the future and what that looks like for us. And right now, I think we're as well positioned as we possibly can be in terms of the questions we have, the opportunities we have, the discussions that are going on about, as Fiona Davis said, we totally agree that there's a whole question about ruminant methane, and some of the work, cows are not cows are not causing climate change. But at the moment, without some of the details around, how some of these policies get implemented, then we could be left really way worse off. So we want to focus on the future. But I think we are sticking to our knitting in terms of, that's why one of the reasons why we had a whole of economy policy, because it's not necessarily about ag so much as some of these other industries doing their part as well. Whilst we're obviously well on the journey and we're going to continue on that path, it is about government policies and how other industries are going to make that journey as well. So we prefer not to actually point fingers at other industries. We leave the political discussion to other people mostly because, to be honest, we have to work with whoever's in government and try and create change that way. And by the same token, we then need to try and get whatever we can do to make sure that the policy environment is right for us when we're looking at land use policy, when we're looking at soil carbon policy or emissions or climate change policy or biodiversity or any of those things. So we find we get more outcomes that way for our industry rather than straying too far into that whole political debate about pointing fingers at other industries.
Fiona Davis, how is it though that you can get these competing land use political fights over whether there should be a coal mine or a farm in one place? Like how do you think government should solve those issues going forward? Because it always ends up usually in the courts or in as we saw on the Liverpool Plains. I think it went 10, 15 years or something, didn't it, before it was resolved. Should we be fighting about these things now when everyone's trying to cut emissions?
So I guess what I'd say here is that we can't eat coal. So we actually need to protect Australia's farming industries to make sure that we can continue to feed and clothe Australians and people across the world. We do have the opportunity now to pivot away from fossil fuels as a source of energy and to really contribute to our emissions reductions. And so there's such a strong argument for us to go in this direction now to really back agriculture to succeed and to ensure that we move in the right direction, that we, listen to all these market signals that we're hearing. The world is moving and we need to move with it. We need to make sure that the amazing agriculture industry that we have here in Australia is protected in the future. And to me, I'm not so cautious about pointing some fingers, I guess. I really think that for agriculture to succeed, we do need to see that action to pivot away from gas and coal and towards renewables, which can really help regional Australia to revitalise our communities and flourish if it's managed in the right way. And that's what we need to see from government. We need to see that leadership to make this, provide the framework so that we don't have these squabbles and it's really clear where our priorities are. And that's in the interest of farming families and Australia more generally.
And can I say, Gabby, I think in terms of what we're talking about here, it's a 30-year pathway. So it's an amazing opportunity that we have to design a transition, a new future for many of the communities and many of the people in regional Australia, because agriculture needs a strong regional Australia. So what does that look like in 30 years? This is like an amazing opportunity right now for us to actually be designing that future, as Fiona Davis said, for market signals, from market and taking into account those things that agriculture really does. So, I think this can be done through the discussions that we're in now, and where everybody has that opportunity to be participating once we have that target, when we start actually all working towards the same goal.
Okay, we've had quite a few questions on regenerative agriculture from the group, and that obviously the definitions are fraught here, but I mean, I would say we're talking about verifiable improvements in landscape as a result of agriculture. Now, the farming systems argument is obviously a big one, and both of you would be totally across that. But the question is regenerative agriculture the solution to addressing climate change? And do you think the current stance by our federal government that agriculture is exempt from addressing carbon emissions is, I assume, is the correct one. I should say agriculture isn't currently exempt from carbon emissions, but would one of you like to have a go at that question? Maybe Fiona Simson.
I thought you'd pick me. So funnily enough, I was just having a conversation this morning with somebody in the States, and we were talking about regenerative agriculture, and also the World Farmers Organization, that National Farmers Federation is now in again after an absence of some years, because it's recognised the importance of these huge global debates and what's happening, and the impacts and the flow-on discussions that we need to be having in Australia. So very much top of mind. For us, we talk about regenerative practices, and I think, you know, your definition, Gabby, that you just used is entirely appropriate for that, because on my own farm, we don't necessarily call ourselves regenerative, as in the whole box and dice thing, but we do a lot of regenerative practices. We've got multi-species, you know, cover crops right down there right now. We've got, you know, we've been using no-till farming for a very long time, conservation tillage, you know, all of the stuff that we do. We're lowering our fertilizers, we're planting nitrogenous crops, all these things that we do, which are certainly regarded as regenerative. So I think farmers have been doing it for a long time. When you start putting labels on things being better for the environment than others, like organic might be better than not, or regenerative might be better than not, that's where people who are very sustainable start to have issues, because it brands agriculture, sections of agriculture, as being bad or good. And as we all know, it's very hard to make blanket rules about those things, that it has to all be backed up by science and the way things are managed and the way things are interpreted. So yes, like regenerative practices, happy to accept that regenerative agriculture as a system is a thing. But also, I don't think necessarily that everybody has to be doing it to actually get good outcomes into the agricultural space, in the sustainability space, or in the food and fibre space.
Okay, Fiona Davis, do you want to just touch on that? Because regenerative agriculture is a concept, I guess, that has had huge buy-in, not just within a portion of farmers, but also within a portion of consumers, eaters. So what is this telling us about the way agriculture is practiced into the future?
So I think there is a lot of scrutiny on the ways that we farm. And I think if we look at the principles that underpin Regen Ag, they're terrific principles for running a really productive system that is sustainable. But also it's good to remember that there isn't one way of doing climate smart ag. So we have farmers who, you know, do say that they're regen farmers. We've got other farmers that are doing those principles who wouldn't describe themselves in those ways. And I'm really conscious we don't want to create divisions within that. We just want to encourage the many great ways that farmers are farming sustainably across Australia. And I also wanted to say, you know, wouldn't it be great if there was a silver bullet, there was one solution that, say, if we all did this one thing, we would have the solution to climate change. But it's not that simple. So we can contribute with our farming practices, but we need, there is no one single bullet. We need to be doing lots of different things, not just on farm, but right across the economy.
Okay, and one more question from the group, and I'm aware we're right on time now, so we'll just extend it by a couple of minutes to answer this question. Someone asked, how does it feel to have governments saying that they love farmers while doing nothing about climate change, which will impact on farmers so much?
I don't think, well, I don't think it's as easy as that. I mean, the government, in terms of technology and biodiversity and looking at some of the, the tools that we use to manage carbon, and the government are probably doing more now, whilst not having had that high level target for agriculture than they've been doing for a while. So we just have to be.
Can you just give me some examples of that?
Yeah, so, for example, Angus Taylor, who everybody, loves to talk about in all sorts of different ways, but in actual fact, the technology tool that actually measures carbon, he's got a goal for that to come down from $30,000 a hectare to $3,000 a hectare. So whilst that's not going to be, as Fiona Davis said, it's not the be all and end all, there's no silver bullet with any of this stuff. If farmers are able to actually measure carbon more easily in their soils, then that would be a great thing. There's also a pilot there around regenerating remnant veg that's coming through the Department of Ag that farmers are able to actually participate in. And there's another pilot around biodiversity and whether we can brand that and whether we can have access to international markets. So some of these things that, we always want to do more, but it's very easy to throw the baby out with the bathwater and, get a bit distracted politically sometimes and not recognise that, there are a lot of things happening at the moment in the farming space when it comes to, and government is right behind our 2030 roadmap, which has a lot of these indicators in there. So I think let's give them credit where it's due. Let's keep asking for more because we always have to be doing that. I want the whole of government behind agriculture. I want the whole of the community ideally behind a strong future for our industry. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater when we recognise some of the tools that government are actually supporting us now. Future Drought Fund, a whole lot of work going on in that space and tools that are given to diversify our landscapes, to diversify our income streams. There is a bit going on in the space. And it's not just due to good advocacy, it is due to government saying, okay, we recognise this is the way forward.
So, Fiona Davis, just on that soil piece, we saw Richard Heath of the Australian Farm Institute come out this week, among others, to say all very well to measure carbon, and I know Mike Crawford at the Soil CRC has said this too, all very well to measure carbon more cheaply, but it's actually finding the ways to get carbon into the soil. The trials done through the CSIRO have shown soil organic carbon is very seasonal. You go head into a roaring drought and it's going to be really hard to improve your carbon and keep it going there. So have we overhyped the soil carbon thing, or does it have some legs?
I'd say here, I think that's been really, as Fiona Simson was saying, there's some really good initiatives coming from government. We love the carbon and biodiversity pilot, the enhanced remnant vegetation pilot. We'd like to see them scaled up nationwide. And I think obviously there are opportunities for farmers to draw down carbon in soils and plants to really enable farmers on a really broad scale to get behind this. They've got to feel really confident that they can afford to do the soil measurement that's involved and that there is the permanence. So that's what we need to see now to really get that broad scale uptake and to ensure that we're doing this to its full potential.
Okay, and just one last question to both of you. A priority, one thing the government could do next when they head back from when Angus Taylor and Scott Morrison, I think, is almost back now. What's the next thing that really needs to be done to help farmers cope with climate change?
Urgently call industry in to discuss some of the initiatives around the plan and make sure that we're at the table to design any of the underlying regulations or legislation that may well accompany it. Because I think at the moment, what we've seen obviously is quite high level. And it does have a lot of implications for our industry. So for me, there's a lot in there that we need to unpack, and a lot of things that it's a bit like the methane pledge. While it all sounds well in practice, if you unpack the fine print underneath, there's a lot you need to that we need to understand. And so that's my one thing, Gabby, at the moment. Let's just get industry in. Let's make sure we can understand fully what's being proposed. Let's make sure we can understand fully what's been agreed to, and let's now have industry at the table as we're designing some of those tools.
Can I just ask you on that methane thing? Sorry to jump in, Fiona Davis, but does that mean that you don't think if NFF isn't supporting a methane pledge, does that mean you don't think the livestock industry will hit that 2030 carbon neutral target?
Not at all. Not at all. What it means is that we don't support, it's not a methane pledge, it's the methane pledge. The methane pledge that was put up by Joe Biden, that, to be quite honest, from what I understand about it, was quite, and I haven't looked deeply into the fine print underneath. But Gabby, it was a very high level methane pledge around cutting methane by 2030. And so, in Australia, at the moment, our ruminant methane makes up a huge proportion of our methane emissions. And so we don't want to expose our livestock sector to any sort of a government action without knowing, it's the fine print that was worrying us about this particular methane pledge and where it came from. And we're not averse. We think we're on a great trajectory. As you said, MLA was out there right in front of the pack. But whilst I want to be future focused, we've been burnt before. Fine print does matter, and we do need to know what's underneath and underpinning some of those pledges, or that pledge particularly. And what I understand now is that different countries are interpreting the fine print in a different way and are going to apply it in different ways in their own countries. So blunt tool, sounds blunt, could be fine print, need to understand it. I can't sign up to anything like that on behalf of the industry or support anything like that without the fine print, when at the moment, the way that methane's calculated, our cows are responsible for, quite a big proportion of Australia's methane, rightly, wrongly, whatever it is, that's how it sits.
Okay, Fiona Davis, what's the thing that you think governments should focus on when they get their feet back on the ground after Glasgow?
Oh, it's so hard to pick one, isn't it? I think the first, I've got a little list. The top of my list is those deep emission cuts this decade. Before you even get to, we commissioned Ernst & Young to draft a report on a low emissions future for Australian ag. That reached the equivalent of net zero by about 2040. We've got great initiatives there that are all voluntary, that will see us make a huge contribution towards Australia's emissions reductions, while also growing our industry and the profitability of Australian farming families. But we can't do that. We can't take advantage of that unless we do this very first piece where we make sure those reductions are made this decade. We can't kick that can down the road. That has to happen as soon as possible.
All right. Well, I think we'll have to leave it there. I could talk to you for hours, but possibly people would get bored. Thank you so much for being involved in our first Facebook Live event. Thank you to the audience for your questions, and we hope to do these on a regular basis. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Gabby. Enjoyed the chat.
Much.
Thanks, Fiona Davis.
Thanks, Fiona Simpson. See you next time.